September the 9th, 1999. It's a date that will live in infamy. But it's also a day of celebration. And that's sort of the conundrum of the Sega Dreamcast. This was the last home console that Sega would put out. And many would say it's their best. It is a ridiculously powerful, amazing system. This thing came out at a time when the PlayStation was pretty much dominating. The N64 was hanging in there. Sega's Saturn just never took off in the United States. It did better in Japan, but it was struggling here pretty much the entire time. And so they decided to move on from it. And they released this console, this 128-bit console. And the capabilities of the Dreamcast were amazing. I mean, staggering. This thing had potential that wasn't realized in other consoles for years to come. They had all the bases covered. The engineering was amazing. 4 players built in. You had online built into the console with an actual modem. The controller was kind of strange, but it was an evolution of the Saturn controller. And by the way, that stick has never had drift. It still works fine. The VMUs were able to give you a unique new experience, especially for sports games, and you could actually download little games onto the VMUs and play them on their own. It was crazy stuff. This thing was so ahead of its time in so many ways, and I think that this is why we look back on the Dreamcast with this serene affection, this bittersweet hope of what could have been. It just had so much potential, so many awesome games, so many hopeful possibilities for what Sega could do. They wowed us with online play, downloads, updates, patches on a game console. It was the first time that ever happened. The sports games took things to another level. I can remember people telling me that they would see NFL 2K running on a TV and think it was the real thing and not even a game. You could upgrade that internet to an Ethernet adapter. It had a keyboard. It had a mouse. You could play games with keyboard and mouse. I've actually got some videos on this channel playing some Dreamcast games like Quake 3 with a keyboard and mouse on a home console in 1999. This is crazy. The discs were what they called GD-ROMs. It was a form of CD, but could hold up to a gigabyte on the disc. It was pretty unique. 200 megahertz processor, 16 mega RAM, 8 mega video RAM. That's crazy. Power VR, really powerful graphics. Just really, really amazing what this thing could do. The Dreamcast games, and there's so many of them, and I have other videos on this channel, like I said, where you can check out some of the Dreamcast games that I've looked at and played a little bit on the channel. But there's no way I could go through the whole library here and show you just all the amazing Dreamcast games, because there are so many of them. A lot of the games that are loved and have this affection for them for the Dreamcast have been re-released on other things, but not all of them. There's plenty of exclusives like this, like Sega Rally. This version's never been re-released on anything, and there's plenty of other games like that for the Dreamcast. It's a console that it's pretty well emulated at this point, but I wouldn't say that the emulation is necessarily perfect. So there's still plenty of reasons to own a Dreamcast. Games like Phantasy Star Online, they actually, there's fans that have figured out ways to get these games back online and have people playing them again. The support for the Dreamcast is pretty amazing. It's pretty out of this world. People really care about this console. I can remember at the time when the Dreamcast came out that we were so excited about it. I had so many of my friends fascinated and interested in the Dreamcast. The local video store, my hometown was a small town, not very big, but we were able to talk them into carrying Dreamcast games, and it was awesome because they were supporting the Dreamcast. We all thought Sega was about to take off all over again, just like with the Genesis. We all were convinced that this was the beginning of a new era for Sega. Things were changing. Things were coming back. Sega was about to be on top all over again because the Dreamcast was amazing. 4-player, local, internet play. Nobody had internet play. It would be far into the PlayStation 2 life cycle. It wouldn't be right away that the Xbox even had online play, or the GameCube. But they were doing it on the Dreamcast in 1999. I still remember the first time I played NFL 2K online against somebody, and I got my butt handed to me. It was an embarrassment, but it was still really cool to play with some person from somewhere across the country. And that was an experience that people were having on a game console. That was not something we were used to seeing. That was happening on PC, sure, but on a game console? And that's why people say the Dreamcast was ahead of its time. Because it was doing things were just impossible to imagine. The VMUs, giving everyone a screen on their controller for different types of information from the game, for calling your plays on the football games. Crazy stuff. Awesome stuff. We wouldn't see that again until the Wii U. And, it was never implemented the same way again. The Dreamcast didn't sell as well as it should have, but it wasn't doing bad. It was actually doing very well in the United States. And the public was behind it. The public was supporting the console. We were excited about it. We'd never seen games on a game console that you could output through a VGA adapter at 640 by 480 resolution. The Dreamcast, I don't know if you would call that HD, but that was the highest resolution we'd ever gotten out of a video game console ever. And it looks good. It still looks good. These graphics still look really good. The frame rates, 60 frames per second on so many of these games. It was crazy because they had the PlayStation versions and the N64 versions of a lot of the games, and Dreamcast was like on another level. It was the first next gen console from that period that really took graphics to a whole new level. I would say the Dreamcast is probably the first modern game console in so many ways. From the graphics, from the frame rates, the way they did the polygons, lighting and shading, the implementation of online play, downloading demos for games. They had a Dreamcast magazine that had demo discs that you could get, and every single one of them was full of fully interactive samples of games, plus videos for different games, stuff like that. It was very fascinating stuff. There was so much there. There was so much. Again, you're going to hear this word a lot with Dreamcast when you talk to fans. There was so much potential. When things didn't work out and Sega walked away from the Dreamcast, when they decided to stop supporting hardware and just become a third-party software company, so many of us were so disappointed. It's left a hole in us as gamers. It's left us with this feeling of longing for what could have been and what should have been for Sega, and what should have been for all of us as gamers. Ever since then, there's been rumors throughout the years, will there ever be another Dreamcast? Will Sega ever make another game console? Dreamcast 2 gets brought up. You'll see, rumors of a Dreamcast 2 pop up every few years. And it's because we just can't let go of this idea. The Dreamcast was just so good. It was just so good. It wasn't perfect. It had some flaws, It would have, if it would have had a DVD player, maybe it could have done better. I don't know. Who could say, really? I mean, Sega had so many internal problems and financial problems at that point. A lot of people say the Dreamcast was doomed from the start because of that. But, wow. I mean, the library for the Dreamcast, both the Japanese library and the Western library, are fantastic. There's a bunch of Dreamcast games that you can get that have been translated that weren't brought out to the United States, and you can get those. There's demos for Dreamcast games that never even came out, like Castlevania. If you haven't had a chance, you can check that stuff out. You can burn Dreamcast games and play them without any kind of a mod chip, without any kind of a cartridge or anything like that. Like for the Saturn, you don't have to have nothing like that for Dreamcast. It's just a console that I think that a lot of us feel like should have been so much more and for much longer. It was barely around for 2 years and it was discontinued. And that's just very sad. But it has left us with many, many years of enjoyment, many years of sharing our thoughts and our love of this console. It's left so many of us with this lingering legacy of love for Sega, for the products that Sega put out, for the games that Sega cared about, for the franchises that were born from Sega's efforts, the programmers and the artists, the musicians, the gamers. This is a console that means so much to so many. And it's because it's just so good. So I think that you know in the scope of video game consoles that have come and gone throughout the decades, I don't think that there's much of an argument. I think most people would agree that the Sega Saturn was an amazing system, sure. But the Dreamcast, that was the console that should have been so much more than what it ended up being. We just barely scratched the surface on what this console could even do. And it could do some amazing stuff. The graphics, the speed, frame rates, so much. And then the online aspect to it was just so far ahead of its time. Yeah. So I absolutely adore the Dreamcast. I've had my Dreamcast since the launch of the system. It was one of those consoles that thankfully I was able to get right when it came out. And from the beginning, you had games like Soul Calibur. And if you've ever played Soul Edge on PlayStation, you know what a huge upgrade Soul Calibur was. Just amazing, just amazing. And that's the story of the Dreamcast. It's a console that we all love because it is just amazing, but it could have been so much more. So I'm not going to go into a lot of the details about the console, the specs, and the background with everything with the company and what they were going through and why things went the way they did. You can look that stuff up. I've said before, and I repeat again, I'm not an expert on anything. I'm just somebody that loves video games. And of the video games that I love and of the consoles that I have that are the closest to my heart, the Dreamcast is in that absolute top echelon. It's the pinnacle of the accomplishments of Sega. They went out with a bang. They left us with a dream that has lingered on and will continue on with us. And it's because this thing was just so good. Sega was not a perfect company. Sega made mistakes, missteps. They failed at a lot of things that they tried to do, but they kept trying. They kept trying all the way through this console. So maybe one day, somehow, some way, Sega will dare to dream again. And the rest of us can hope and dream ourselves that such a thing is possible. Because we know what was possible when Sega made video game systems. Once upon a time. This is going to conclude my series talking about the wonderful game consoles put out by one of my favorite companies, Sega. But this is not the end of my discussion of Sega's games and Sega's consoles. I will continue to put out videos. I will continue to discuss many of the greatest games that have ever been made. And a lot of them were on Sega hardware. So thank you so much for watching this series. Thank you so much for your support on the channel. I look forward to continuing to have good conversations with you, and I hope you'll stick around. And I hope you'll get a chance to play the Dreamcast if you haven't, because there's not much better about games, about gaming, than what's available on this system. You can get one. It's not super expensive. You can burn the games. You don't even have to buy them, although, you know, you can. Unfortunately, a lot of my Dreamcast games that I bought back in the day have issues, disc rot or scratches and things like that, so it's good that you have options. They have optical drive emulators to play games that way, and then of course, like I said, emulation has come a long way for Dreamcast. So whatever way you got to do it, check it out. Play some Dreamcast. You won't regret it. And share your thoughts. Let me know what your favorite games are, your favorite experiences. Let's talk about some more Dreamcast stuff, some more Sega stuff. From the Master System to the Game Gear, the Genesis Mega Drive, the Sega Saturn, the 32X. and the Dreamcast. Thanks. I appreciate it, guys. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.